Oh, these are Earth dinosaurs.
They're less scary like this.
Good setting to talk about Star Fox Adventures, huh?
Or we could just enjoy the museum.
Plus, to understand Star Fox Adventures, you need to understand Dinosaur Planet.
Yeah, let's start there.
After the success of Star Fox 64, fans eagerly await another high-flying space adventure that takes them through asteroids and distant worlds. But when they get the next Star Fox game, it isn't what they were expecting. Fox is mostly on foot instead of being in his R-Wing, and there's more dinosaurs. And Legend of Zelda influences than anyone was expecting. During the development of Killer Instinct, Kevin Bayliss was working as a character designer. Before the game became Killer Instinct, Bayliss was working on experimenting with 3D software. His idea was to create a tiger-like character on all fours, or a character similar to something you would see in Thundercats. The Tiger Band wouldn't make its way into Killer Instinct. However, its head would be used in Joggo's temple, and his quadruped form would appear in Orchid's special move, the Fire Cat, a move that I don't hate and my cousins never spanned me with.
After Killer Instinct, Kevin Bayliss would continue to work on his tiger concept and created a tiger character he thought would be perfect for a platformer. The tiger could run on all fours and even run up walls using his little kitty claws.
Rare wouldn't go through with their platformer, but instead started working on a racing game called Wild Cartoon Kingdom. This would eventually shift into becoming Pro-Am 64 for the Nintendo 64. At this point, the main character would have been Kevin Bayliss' tiger, known as Timber. But after the delay of Banjo-Kazooie, another one of Rare's games, the team at Rare was desperate for a AAA game for the 1997 holiday season. Shigeru Miyamoto would play Pro-Am 64 and suggested Rare use one of Nintendo's better-known IPs. So Pro-Am 64 turned into Diddy Kong Racing, and Timber was moved from being the main character in favor of the title character, Diddy Kong.
It was time for me to step out of the shadow of DK and get my own game!
After the success of Diddy Kong Racing, the team at Rare started to work on another hybrid adventure racing game. Here, they hoped to do things that they weren't able to do with Diddy Kong Racing, like have Timber be the main character. The game would have Timber the tiger going on a platforming adventure with his little rucksack, but with a slight twist. You see, this was the 90s, and the 90s were known for various things. Transparent electronics, the start of CGI being more widely used in movies, everything being extremes, and dinosaurs. In the 90s, prehistoric CGI scaly creatures filled the screen, each one being bigger than the last, capturing the imagination of all those who watched it. Inspired by movies like Jurassic Park and Dragonheart, Rare decides to set their new game in a prehistoric setting and change the name to Dinosaur Planet. The game would still be a hybrid racing adventure game, but now with a time-traveling Timber the Tiger. Time-traveling Timber the Tiger. Say that 5 times fast. According to Phil Tossell, it was supposed to be a hybrid of Diddy Kong Racing and an adventure game. Every level would have some sort of track in it, and a race as part of the story. Finally, it looked like Timber was going to be able to be the lead in his own game. But then the team at Rare played Ocarina of Time. Like many of us, Rare was touched when they experienced Ocarina of Time. Everything from the combat, the expansive worlds, the characters, and the storytelling. They were so touched by it, in fact, they decided to incorporate some of those elements into Dinosaur Planet. Though the new Dinosaur Planet would play homage to Ocarina of Time, it would also bring Rare's own brand of creativity and innovation. Instead of a single-player offering, Rare came up with the idea of 2 playable characters that would need to be switched out throughout the story. And yet again, Timber was replaced, but not forgotten. He was replaced by Sabre the Wolf and Krystal the Fox.
I was very different at the time. I was less this and more cute and cuddly.
Time travel? That's so 1985. So the time traveling aspect was gone in favor of a high fantasy story with some sci-fi elements. The story would be a high-flying epic about how Krystal and Sabre, 2 heroes from the planet Anima that landed on Dinosaur Planet to rescue both Princess Kite and Prince Tricky. Krystal would rescue Kite while Sabre would rescue Tricky, who was on the other side of the planet. Both dinosaurs would join their respective savior and be their dinosaur companion through the game. You start off as Krystal, but at any time after the intro, you can use the swap stones to swap to the other character's story. With talking animals, talking dinosaurs, and a talking evil pirate dinosaur general, Dinosaur Planet felt like the type of game that could only be conceived in the 90s. And like with everything Rare did, They would put their all into the game, which included multiple innovations, such as Dinosaur's companions for each character. We may take for granted companion characters, but here it was a new frontier, and pretty impressive that they were able to pull it off. The game used the N64 expansion pack that goes here, and would double the RAM. This helped push past the N64's limits and realize lush and vibrant environments. The game also had dynamic weather and a day-night system, similar to the one in Ocarina of Time, but on a larger scope. From the moment you set foot on Dinosaur Planet, the day-night system kicks in, aiding to a sense of realism and immersion. And what's a world without people, or in this case dinosaurs, to inhabit it? And this is where I feel that Dragonheart influence came in, with each character with their lush and resonant voices almost felt Shakespearean in their delivery. Which is only noticeable since every line, big or small, is voiced, and is not something Nintendo did or does often. I guess you could say it was rare.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Oh, come on, it was right there. Was I not supposed to say anything? It may be hard to believe, but all the characters were just voiced by the dev team at Rare. But the characters actually sounded good, which is a far cry from Resident Evil's "Jill, don't open that door." The characters just didn't sound good, they looked good too. The textures on everyone and everything were absolutely amazing for the time. But at this point, Rare were experts at getting a lot while using very little processing. They did this by using various tricks. For example, they were able to get dynamic light in Donkey Kong 64 by recording the light's movement in real time and playing it back as an animation, so only the initial entrance to the cave has to slow down. This allowed them to utilize dynamic lighting cheaply, no DLSS needed. But even with these tricks, they were pushing the system to its limit. Lee Schumann would say, "I think we were running at 15 frames per second most of the time. Clearly we had pushed it too far." But as with Diddy Kong Racing, and much of the Dinosaur Planet team were from that team also, we just wanted to realize our vision and screw the technical limitations. Holding a sense of nostalgia from the 90s era of gaming, these worlds hold their own sense of beauty despite not being as detailed or populated as the huge games we have today. While not as big, everything feels more intentional here. Every rock, every branch, every leaf has a curated place on the map. The gameplay, while reminiscent of Ocarina of Time, feels new and fresh due to the character design choices that separate it from Ocarina. Because of its look and being developed by Rare, the game was highly anticipated. Magazines and websites reported about Dinosaur Planet and how it was going to be the next hot thing and the last great game on the Nintendo 64. Then came E3 2000, where people got their first chance to play it. This only increased anticipation. People loved the game, citing that it was beautiful and played well. And some sources, now this might come off as blasphemy, said it could be better than Ocarina of Time. And even Nintendo loved the game. Lee Schumann would say, "I had a great moment with Dinosaur Planet when I demoed the game on a giant projection screen at Rare with ex-Nintendo of America president Arakawa-san. It was this big cinematic style game coming out of the N64. Lots of applause and a happy moment for the team." But dear viewer, before we go any further, I have to take you back to 1997 when Star Fox 64 is released, a landmark game on the Nintendo 64 that redefined the series and became a favorite amongst fans.
Star Fox 64 was an on-rails shooter about the Star Fox team, which consists of me, Peppy Hare, Falco Lombardi, and Slippy Toad, fighting the forces of the evil Andross.
The game was a huge hit for Nintendo and a beloved game for fans. After its release, Takeya Imamura, who worked as the character designer on Star Fox and Star Fox 2 for the SNES and programmer for Star Fox 64, wanted to make his next game. Miyamoto said instead of making a shooter, Imamura should focus on making an adventure game. So he set out to make Star Fox Adventure, an adventure game with Fox shooting enemies in an attempt to recreate the feeling of shooting down enemies in the Landmaster. Immediately, the first problem that Imamura had to overcome was the camera being obstructed by the player's character. This was before Resident Evil 4 would revolutionize shooting in video games with its over-the-shoulder camera. Despite these difficulties, Imamura would continue to push through with his idea to develop the next Star Fox game. But at this time, his attention would be split between Star Fox Adventures and Nintendo's other next big sequel, a continuation of Ocarina of Time called Majora's Mask. Ocarina of Time pops up a lot in this story. More and more, Nintendo and even Imamura himself would be brought onto the project because of the amount of work and the tight deadline. As time went on, the Nintendo 64 got closer and closer to the end of its lifespan, and the Nintendo Dolphin, aka the GameCube, was on the horizon. Now jumping ahead slightly to 2000, after Dinosaur Planet's E3 reveal, Nintendo was placed in an odd predicament. On one hand, they had Dinosaur Planet, a game that had received a ton of good press and was received well in playtests, but it was being released on the Nintendo 64, a system at the end of its lifespan. So to put this in perspective, the E3 showcase was in May of 2000, and the GameCube would be released on November 18th, 2001. Nintendo had to ask themselves, would it benefit them to release such a great game on a console that was at the end of its lifespan? And on the other hand, they had Star Fox Adventures, one of their most popular IPs that was hitting a development snag while also being developed for a console that was at the end of its lifespan. So, behind closed doors, Nintendo and Rare made a deal to rebrand Dinosaur Planet as Star Fox Adventures Dinosaur Planet, which was a blessing and a curse. For Rare, this meant putting a popular IP on their game and giving it more appeal and recognition, but on the other hand, it meant completely retooling the game that they had been developing for 5 years. Thus, Dinosaur Planet was cancelled. And it is at this point that we need to acknowledge that most of the footage of Dinosaur Planet comes from the leaked prototype of Dinosaur Planet that was recovered by Forest of Illusion and restored by a dedicated community of gamers. Thank you for preserving what would have otherwise been lost media. In England, there's a quaint little village with little over 800 people called Twycross. And a little further out from the center of that village is an 18th century farm. This is where Chris and Tim Stamper, the Stamper brothers, founded Rare in 1985. This farmhouse is where some of the best and influential games from the 90s were created. And a few thousand miles away in Kyoto, Japan, we have Nintendo, an over 100-year-old company that also made some of the best and influential games of the 90s. Each company is great in its own right, but they also have very distinct design styles.
Some of the Rare team flew to Japan to begin planning the redirection. Right away, Sabre and Krystal were out, and I became the main character. You weren't offended by that, were you, Krystal?
Possibly. But was it the right choice? Who knows?
One of the first things that they had to decide on was what weapon to give Fox. Up until that point, they were using Sabre's sword and Krystal's staff, but Imamura wanted to create a shooter. So a debate would ensue around what weapon to give Fox. His blaster, a whip? Eventually, it was settled on giving him Krystal's staff, and giving it the ability to shoot. Now around this time, the team from Rare got to envelop themselves in a little Japanese culture. They went to the Fushimi Inari Shrine in Kyoto, where they see foxes. Lots of foxes. Just look how cute the little guys are. They find out about the history of the fox in Japan. They learned how the foxes in the shrine are seen as guardians. This helps shape Rare's perspective on Fox McCloud for the game. Both teams would start to work together more cohesively as they tried to work through the various issues. One of the big ones was navigating the switch from the Nintendo 64 to the GameCube. It offered a set of new challenges. Dinosaur Planet's transition from one section of the game to the next was made seamless due to the cartridge's extremely fast transfer speed, meaning the console could quickly get the data it needed off the cartridge and on the screen. And though the GameCube had more power, and many at Rare enjoyed developing for it, it had limitations, including the disk drive spinning really slow, which meant it took longer to seek data and show it on the screen. A slower disk means that it was harder for them to have the game move fast, which leads to loading times and pop-up in the games as you get closer to objects. But despite the limitations, the team had a good experience working with the GameCube. Bill Tossell, the lead programmer, would say, "On a whole, the GameCube was very enjoyable to develop for. The range of effects we were able to achieve due to the multi-stage configurable graphics pipeline was remarkable. This pipeline was like an N64 on steroids. The N64 had 2 stages, the GameCube had 16 if memory serves me right, and was a precursor to the fully programmable graphic cards that were appearing on PCs. The team got to work on rapidly porting over Star Fox Adventures to the GameCube. Despite the speed, it certainly didn't come at the cost of the game's graphics. Which is no surprise, as Rare had a track record for producing great graphics and even outdoing Nintendo on a few occasions.
When Miyamoto saw Banjo-Kazooie, he was so impressed by the graphics that he delayed Ocarina of Time so they could redo the textures a bit so not to be outdone. So if you like the way the Ocarina of Time looked, you're welcome."
And these weren't the only problems during development. Rare was also sold to Microsoft. Surprisingly, it wasn't Nintendo. That's like chocolate not buying peanut butter, or Peanut butter not by marshmallow. Where my Fluffernutter fans at? I'm telling you, it's good. But yeah, it was the end of an era as Rare and Nintendo's close partnership was coming to an end. The looming sale acted as a motivator for the Star Fox Adventures development team. Tossa recalled that working on the game felt like a blessing because the team had a clear deadline for completion before the sale was finalized, which spurred them on to finish the game. Going from Dinosaur Planet to Star Fox Adventures, a lot of sacrifices had to be made. One of them was Krystal. Her and Sabre were cut from the game, but Takeya Imamura worked to ensure that Krystal was not scrapped, believing it would be a waste. Imamura was highly attached to the character. Imamura visited Rare and drew many pictures of Krystal, drawing inspiration from the American comic book character Vampirella. This led to Star Fox Adventures' version of Krystal being much quote-unquote sexier than the original Dinosaur Planet design. Both Imamura and Shigeru Miyamoto reportedly aimed to add a little bit of sex appeal to the character and the game.
Wait, so all those pictures online? That's Nintendo's fault.
Yeah, basically. When the game did release, it was one of the best looking games on the GameCube. It even looks better than Star Fox Assault, a game that would come out a couple years later. And in my opinion, I think it gives The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess a run for its money. A game that's said to push the GameCube's graphical capabilities to its limits.
But how was it received? Well, actually, it sold over 200,000 copies and the reviews were actually really good. Yes, it became more divisive over time, but it was an early success for the GameCube and a technical marvel, and it ended an era. And in my opinion, that era went out in a bang.
Why'd you bring me here?
What's wrong, buddy? You didn't have fun?
Why would you bring me here? How would you feel if I promised you a fun afternoon and took you to a graveyard? This is kind of messed up. Don't ignore
thanks for
me.
Thanks for watching
Pay
the video.
attention to
Make sure
me.
you like,